Sabrina realized how selfish she was being. Granny Rhoda was heartbroken and certainly not ready to plunge the family into another dangerous adventure, even if it meant saving Henry and Veronica. Her grandmother needed time to mourn. Sabrina would have to rescue her parents on her own. When she was sure everyone was deeply asleep, Sabrina struggled from her blanket cocoon. It took her nearly half an hour to maneuver herself to freedom, but eventually she escaped and headed downstairs. She crept through the house, doing her best to avoid creaky floorboards. Being in the foster care system for so long had taught her a lot about how to be sneaky. She could creep out of someone's house right under the pastor's nose. Once in the living room, she reached over and flipped on a table lamp. Elvis was lying on a couch, a place he knew very well he was not supposed to be. He cocked his head with a guilty look. "You don't say anything, and I won't say anything," Sabrina whispered. The big dog seemed okay with the deal. He plopped his huge noggin back down on a cushion and fell asleep. On the far wall were the bookshelves that held the family journals, as well as the largest collection of fairy tale stories and studies Sabrina had ever seen, including such volumes as The 7 People You Meet in Oz, Cheap Eats in Wonderland, and a weighty one called The Paul Bunyan Diet. The library spilled onto the floor and into the other rooms. Some books held up on wobbly tables. Others were literally swept under the rug. Sabrina had once found a book inside the toilet tank. Tonight she didn't need to search for what she wanted. She reached over and scooped up as many family journals as her fat, good arm would hold. Crossing into the dining room, she placed them on the table and then went back for the rest. Once she had gathered them all, she flipped on a tiny lamp by the table and sat down to read. Someone in this family has to know something about the girl in the red cloak and her pet Jabberwocky, she thought. She found her first reference to the Jabberwocky in her great-great-great-great-great-grandfather Wilhelm's account of his Atlantic crossing with his magical passengers. Wilhelm had brought the FFs to America to help them escape persecution, and from his earliest entries, Sabrina could see it hadn't been an easy journey. July 7th, 1805. I'm contemplating turning back. The voyage is already fraught with disasters. Crossing the Atlantic with a ship full of fairy tale creatures is a difficult enough task, but situations became unruly today when the Jabberwockies ran amok. I cursed myself for putting so much stock in the Queen of Hearts' demands. She insisted the beasts might someday be domesticated. The woman is a fool, but she has tremendous support amongst the passengers and the crew. 15 leagues out, the trouble began. The Jabberwockies broke loose from their cages. There were 10, and together they killed a dozen human seamen before Lancelot and Robin Hood drove them into the hull of the ship. The Black Knight went down with the Vorpal blade and finished the monsters off. Then the rest of us tossed their bodies overboard. Let the sharks have their foul remains. What's the Vorpal blade? Serena wondered, but Wilhelm never mentioned it again. Sabrina reached the other journals and found no other references to the Jabberwockies or the blade, except in 2 entries by her great-great-great-grandfather Spalding Grimm. March 9th, 1909. When the Lilliputians came to me with the news, I hoped it was just more of their usual mischief, but they were right. Her Jabberwockies roamed the forest. From what father told me, the monsters had all been killed during the voyage from Europe. Could one of the monsters have attached itself to the bottom of the ship and survived the rest of the trip? The magic mirror has informed me that the beasts hibernate for great periods of time, so it could have hidden in the woods without any of us finding it. It's also possible that someone brought another one over from Lorneland, but who? Like my grandfather, I have turned to the Black Knight. I gave him the Vorpal blade and my prayers. March 10th, 1909. The Black Knight has betrayed me. Instead of hunting the Jabberwocky, he used the Vorpal blade in a way I never thought possible. He cut a hole in the magical barrier that surrounds the town. He's escaped into the world of humans. I blame myself for trusting the knight. His history is filled with double dealings, but there were no other volunteers. I found the sword lying nearby and have it again in my possession, though it will do me little good. There's no one brave enough in this town to go after the monster, and no one I trust with the blade. Baba Yaga has offered her help. She claims she can entrap the monster with the same spell she and my grandfather cast on the town. Once the beast is captured, I'll find a way to destroy the blade. If the rest of the Ever Afters were to find out that it can cut through the barrier, there would be chaos in the streets. Perhaps the blue fairy can be of some assistance. Sabrina closed the journal and looked over at the clock on the wall. She'd been walking for nearly 3 hours and sleep was finally creeping up on her. The only other thing she had discovered was strange but unhelpful. Some of the pages in her father's journals had been ripped out, a great many of them, in fact, at the end of his writings. Her eyes fluttered. She wondered if closing them for a moment or two might help. No sooner had she rested her head on the dining room table and closed her eyes when someone said, "Time to wake up." Sabrina bolted upright in her chair and glanced around the dining room. Sitting at the end of the table was the girl in the red cloak. The Jabberwocky who was seated next to her, breathing so heavily Sabrina could feel his breath from across the room. The two intruders were hovering over a filthy tea set laid out on the table. The little girl poured a thick, stringy substance into 2 cups and set one in front of the monster. Its teeth gnashed, and a rope of drool fell out of its mouth. "Have some tea," the little girl said to Sabrina. She poured a 3rd cup and slid it across the table. Whatever was in it was bubbling and black. "How did you get in here?" Sabrina asked. The little girl in red giggled. Suddenly, Henry and Veronica materialized in their seats next to Sabrina. They looked terrified and worried. "Sabrina, you have to save us," her mother said. "You're our only hope," her mother cried. "But I'm just a little girl," Sabrina protested. Just then, the shrill cry of an unhappy infant filled the room. "You've woken the baby," the little girl wailed. The Jabberwocky tossed the table aside, sending the tea set smashing to the floor. The creature leaped forward and wrapped its huge talons around Sabrina's neck. And then Sabrina woke up. The Jabberwocky, the girl in red, and her mom and dad were gone. She sat silently for a moment, struggling to calm her breathing. She glanced down at the journals in front of her, noticing that her grandfather's fun journal was flipped open. There was something very small written at the bottom of one of the pages, and Sabrina had to strain to read it. Fairport Learning Asylum Patient List, 1955. The man had a diagnosis, schizophrenia. Chicken Little, diagnosis, panic attacks. Hansel, diagnosis, eating disorder, outpatient. The White Rabbit, diagnosis, OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder, outpatient. The Old Woman Who Lived in a Shoe, diagnosis, exhaustion, outpatient. Ichabod Crane, diagnosis, night terrors, outpatient. Little Red Riding Hood, diagnosis, psychosis with delusions and hallucinations, homicidal tendencies. Sabrina's heart rose up into her throat when she saw the last name on the list. The little girl in the red cloak who had taken her parents was Little Red Riding Hood. Now that it was right in front of her, she felt stupid. How could I not figure that out? But how could she? She'd read the story many times. Little Red Riding Hood was one of the good guys. She wasn't evil. She was a victim. Why would she kidnap Henry and Veronica Grimm? And then it dawned on her. All the rooms she had seen in the abandoned building she and Puck had been transported to had been hospital rooms. It was the Ferryport Landing Asylum. She leaped from the chair and hurried through the house, back up the steps and down the hall to Granny's room. She did her best to open the door without causing it to creak, and found her sister sound asleep next to their grandmother. Sabrina rushed to her side and gently shook the little girl awake. "What's wrong?" Daphne whispered as she rubbed the sleep from the corner of her eyes. "You're mad at me for not including you when I went to get Mom and Dad, right?" Sabrina said. Her little sister nodded. "Then get up. We've got some work to do." Chapter 3. "You promised Granny you wouldn't go back to that place," Daphne said as the girls rushed down the hallway. "No, you promised," Sabrina said. The little girl stood in front of her sister and crossed her arms defiantly. "I won't let you go." "Daphne, I know who kidnapped our parents," Sabrina said. Her sister gasped. "Who?" "Little Red Riding Hood." "Nuh-uh," Daphne cried. "I know it sounds crazy, but it's true. That hospital where I found Mom and Dad was an insane asylum. Little Red Riding Hood was a patient there. I have to go back. There might be clues that survived the fire that will tell us where the little nutcase took our parents. Sabrina stepped around her sister and continued down the hallway. Daphne chased after her. "We should wait until morning. Maybe we can convince Granny to take us up there herself," the little girl said. "We don't need to bother her with this. She is sad about Mr. Candace and needs some time before she can help us do anything. Unfortunately, every minute we wait is another minute Red Riding Hood can take Mom and Dad farther away," Sabrina said. "She's already got a 3-day head start on us." "But—" "Daphne, listen," Sabrina interrupted. "I'm bringing Mom and Dad home with or without you. Every ounce of misery we've experienced in the last year and a half could have been avoided if Mom and Dad hadn't been kidnapped. We would never have been in foster care. We'd still be living at home, safe and sound. If we can get our family back, then things will go back to the way they were." "What about the Jabberwocky thing?" "I'll deal with that if and when I have to," Sabrina said, trying to sound confident. Her sister's doubtful expression told her the words didn't sound as convincing as she'd hoped. "Then we have to take Puck with us," Daphne declared. "No way," Sabrina said. Her anger at the boy felt almost physical, like it might bubble over inside her body and pour out her ears. "Yes way," Daphne insisted. "If you're going to make me break a promise to Granny, then you're going to have to let him come along." "Now go on my own," Sabrina snapped. And I will scream at the top of my lungs and wake Granny before you get a chance to go." "You wouldn't." "Try me." Sabrina snarled. "Fine," she said as she marched to the door at the end of the hall. On it was a crude drawing of a crocodile that read, "Intruders will be eaten." Ignoring the sign, Sabrina turned the doorknob and dragged her sister into the room. Puck's room was every little boy's fantasy come to life, but it wasn't exactly a room. In fact, the only thing about it that even remotely resembled a bedroom was the door that led to it from the hallway. Where the ceiling should have been was an open night sky filled with thousands of twinkling stars shining down on a lagoon below. A roller coaster rolled along a track above the water, and an ice cream truck sat parked on the shore. There was a boxing ring set up off to the right, while a kangaroo wearing boxing shorts and gloves slumbered peacefully. Sabrina noticed a new addition to the room: a mechanical bowl splattered with eggs. Dozens of cracked shells and empty egg cartons lay below it. Puck was nowhere in sight. That's the end of this video. I'll see you more later. Goodbye.